I remember every detail of that night. How the chandeliers at Blue Heron Bistro cast a golden glow over the white tablecloths, how the lake shimmered beyond the windows, how the pianist played softly in the corner. I remember the weight of my silverware in my hands, the taste of the Pinot Noir I barely touched, and most vividly, I remember the look on my husband's face when he decided to shatter our 15 years of marriage over lobster bisque. I had chosen to wear the navy dress Grayson always said brought out the blue in my eyes, a last attempt at rekindling something I already knew was gone. My dark hair was swept up, my grandmother's pearl earrings catching the light. I looked good. I knew I looked good, but apparently not good enough. "Rachel," Grayson said, setting down his spoon, with a decisive clink. "I've been meaning to talk to you. There's a particular tone that comes before devastation. Calm, practiced, almost apologetic, but with an undercurrent of anticipation. I recognized it immediately. The restaurant noise seemed to fade around us like someone turning down the volume dial on everything except my husband's voice. I think we both know things haven't been working for a while," he continued, adjusting the cuff of his tailored shirt, the one I'd bought him for Christmas. His silver hair was freshly cut, his face tanned from what he'd claimed was a business golf outing last weekend. I nodded slightly, taking another sip of wine. "I've noticed you've been distant," I said softly. Distant was an understatement. For months, he'd been a ghost in our lake. Shore Drive apartment, coming home late, leaving early, his excuses as polished as his Italian leather shoes. "It's more than that, Rachel." His voice dropped to what I'd come to think of as his boardroom tone. Confident, unapologetic. "I've met someone. I'm leaving you." The words hung in the air between us. Though I'd suspected, though I'd seen the signs, the late-night texts, the new cologne, the sudden business trips. Hearing it stated so plainly felt like being pushed off a cliff. "Her name is Tiffany," he continued, looking past my shoulder. "And actually," I turned to follow his gaze and saw her approaching our table. She couldn't have been more than 30, tall, blonde, wearing a dress that cost more than some people's monthly rent. The kind of woman who made heads turn, including my husband's. "I invited her to join us," Grayson said. "I thought we could all be adults about this." Adults. As if humiliating me in public was the mature approach. Tiffany slid into the chair beside Grayson, her hand immediately finding his on the table. "Hi, Rachel," she said, her voice high and practiced. "I've heard so much about you." I doubted that very much. "I'm sorry we're meeting like this," she continued, not sounding sorry at all. But Grayson thought it would be easier this way. Easier for whom, I wanted to ask, but kept my silence. Grayson cleared his throat. "Rachel, I think you'll understand. At my age, 52 is hardly ancient, Grayson," I interjected. He frowned at the interruption. "At my stage in life, I've realized I need something different. Tiffany makes me feel alive again." His fingers entwined with hers, and she beamed at him like he'd just offered her the moon. "I need someone younger, more vibrant, someone who understands the future I'm building," he continued. At this, Tiffany giggled, actually giggled, and leaned in to whisper something in his ear. He smiled that smile I once thought was just for me. "We're thinking of moving to the West Coast," he said, turning back to me. "Fresh start. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce proceedings next week. I think you'll find I'm being more than generous with the settlement." Generous. The word echoed in my mind, along with all the conversations we'd had over the years about our finances, about his brilliant investments that I'd actually orchestrated, about the family money that had grown under my careful management while he played golf with clients. I remained quiet, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably. Around us, other diners were beginning to notice the drama unfolding at our table. I could feel their eyes, hear their whispers. My humiliation was becoming a spectator sport. "Rachel?" Grayson prompted, clearly expecting tears, anger, perhaps a scene. "Did you hear what I said?" I'm trying to be fair about this. Fair. Another interesting word choice. I took a deep breath, set down my wine glass, and reached for my purse. The sleek leather bag he'd never noticed was actually large enough to carry important documents. I removed a neatly bound folder, opened it, and spread several papers across the table, careful not to let them touch the water glasses. "What's this?" he asked, frowning. "Bank statements," I replied calmly, "from all our accounts." His expression shifted from confusion to irritation. "This isn't the time or place to discuss finances, Rachel. As I said, my lawyer will—" "Every account," I interrupted, my voice steady despite the rapid beating of my heart. "Every investment, Every property, every dollar, all in my name. The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. What are you talking about? Those are our joint accounts. No, Grayson, they were joint accounts. Until about 6 months ago, when I noticed you'd started moving money around. When I found the apartment you'd leased for your meetings. I glanced at Tiffany, whose smile had frozen in place. When I realized what was coming, I turned another page, revealing the ownership documents for our Lakeshore Drive apartment. Remember when you were too busy to attend the closing after we refinanced last year? The new deed is in my name only. Tiffany's laughter died instantly. The restaurant had gone unnervingly quiet, the kind of silence that follows a thunderclap. You can't do this, Grayson hissed, his voice low but trembling with rage. That's our money. My money. Your money? I smiled for the first time that evening. Grayson, who do you think has been managing our investments for the past decade while you've been taking credit for the returns? Who do you think actually built the portfolio you love to brag about? It wasn't your financial advisor. It was your wife. I could see the realization dawning on him, the mental calculations spinning behind his eyes. All those years when he'd handed me the financial statements without reading them, when he'd signed documents I'd prepared without question, trusting that I, reliable, boring Rachel, would handle the details while he took the glory. You've been planning this, he accused, his voice rising. No, I corrected him. I've been protecting myself. There's a difference. Tiffany was looking between us, her confidence visibly crumbling. Grayson, what is she talking about? You said you were worth millions. He was, I replied before he could answer. We were. Together. I gathered the papers back into my folder and stood up, surprisingly steady on my feet. Separately, however, the picture looks quite different. 15 years ago, I fell in love with Grayson Langford's smile. It was the kind of smile that made promises, of adventure, of passion, of a future so bright it would blind you if you looked directly at it. We met at a charity gala in downtown Chicago, where I was working as an event coordinator and he was a rising star in investment banking. He approached me at the bar, ignoring the flutes of champagne in favor of asking for my number. I don't usually do this, he'd said, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. But I'd never forgive myself if I let you walk out of here without at least trying. I'd been wearing a red dress that night, my dark hair falling in waves down my back. I was 27, ambitious but cautious, the product of parents who had struggled through 3 recessions and raised me to believe that financial independence was as important as oxygen. Do what? I'd asked, amused by his approach. Fall instantly. He'd gestured to the space between us. But here we are. I should have recognized the line for what it was. Rehearsed, calculated, effective. But there was something in the way he looked at me that made me want to believe him. So I gave him my number, and 3 days later, we were having dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Lincoln Park, where he told me about growing up in suburban Connecticut, about his dreams of making partner before 40, about the brownstone he planned to buy overlooking the lake. By our 5th date, I was introducing him to the concept of diversified investment portfolios. By our 1st anniversary, I was restructuring his approach to retirement planning. By the time he proposed, 2 years in, I had quadrupled his net worth through strategic investments that he proudly told his colleagues were his own brilliant ideas. I didn't mind. I loved him, and I loved the challenge of building something substantial together. My parents had raised me on financial literacy instead of fairy tales. I found romance in compound interest and security in diversification. When Grayson marveled at my knack for the markets, calling me his secret weapon, I felt valued in a way that transcended traditional romance. We married at the Chicago Botanical Garden, surrounded by blooming hydrangeas and the gentle sound of fountains. For richer, for poorer, we promised each other, though at that point it was clear which direction we were headed. My parents gave us a modest check as a wedding gift. His parents gave us a vacation home in Lake Geneva that we sold 3 years later to invest in an emerging tech company that eventually tripled our money. The first 5 years were golden. We traveled, we built our portfolio, we renovated the Lakeshore Drive apartment into something from the pages of Architectural Digest. Grayson made partner at 40, just as he'd planned, and I left my job to manage our increasingly complex financial life full-time. We discussed children, but decided to wait. There was always more to achieve, more to secure before we brought new life into our world. It was somewhere around year 7 that the shadows began to lengthen. Small changes at first. Grayson coming home later, distracted conversations over dinner, a growing preference for networking events over quiet evenings together. I told myself it was the pressure of his position, the constant need to perform in a cutthroat industry. "You understand, don't you, Rach?" he'd say, kissing my forehead as he headed out the door for another late meeting. "This is for us." By year 10, the shadows had deepened. There were business trips that seemed unnecessarily extended, receipts for dinners for two on nights he'd claimed to be dining with clients, a new attention to his appearance that went beyond professional necessity. Still, I pushed my suspicions aside. We had built too much together to be derailed by insecurity. It was in our 12th year that I found the first concrete evidence, a text message on his phone from someone named T, while he was in the shower. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." When confronted, he dismissed it as a colleague's gratitude for his mentorship. I chose to believe him because the alternative was too painful to consider. But as they say, when there's smoke, there's usually fire. And by year 14, our marriage was engulfed in it, though we both pretended not to notice the flames. Grayson's absences became more frequent, his explanations more elaborate. I found myself spending evenings alone in our expansive apartment, staring out at the lake and wondering when exactly we had become strangers sharing an address rather than partners sharing a life. That was when I began to prepare. Not for revenge, but for survival. I started by reviewing all our financial documents, tracing the complex web of investments, properties, and accounts we had accumulated over the years. Most were joint, but many were primarily in Grayson's name, despite my being the architect of their growth. Slowly, methodically, I began to restructure. A transfer here, a name change there, all perfectly legal, and given my role managing our finances, all easily accomplished with the occasional signature from a husband too busy with his meetings to read what he was signing. I wasn't stealing. I was securing. I was ensuring that the life I had helped build wouldn't be ripped away from me when the inevitable finally happened, because by then, I knew it was coming. I could feel it approaching like a storm over the lake, dark and unstoppable. The final confirmation came 6 months before that fateful dinner at Blue Heron Bistro. A credit card statement with charges for a downtown apartment Grayson had never mentioned, followed by a jewelry purchase from Tiffany & Co. that had never made its way to my jewelry box. Then, a week later, I saw them together, entering that same apartment building, her hand on his arm, his hand on the small of her back, familiar, possessive. I didn't confront him then. Instead, I accelerated my preparations. I transferred the last of our joint assets into accounts solely in my name. I updated the deed to our apartment during a refinance Grayson was too busy to handle. I created a separate life for myself within the shell of our marriage, waiting for the moment when the shell would finally crack. And then came the dinner invitation. "Let's go somewhere." "Nice," he'd said that morning, not quite meeting my eyes. "Blue Heron Bistro. I've made reservations for 8. I had nodded, knowing exactly what was coming. What I hadn't expected was that he would bring her along to witness my humiliation. That, as it turned out, was his final miscalculation in a marriage defined by my silent corrections of his errors. As I stood at our table that night, gathering my belongings after revealing the truth about our finances, I felt a strange sense of calm. 15 years had led to this moment, this public unmasking of pretense, this final reckoning. "What happens now?" Grayson asked, his voice barely audible, his confidence shattered like the wine glass Tiffany had knocked over in her shock. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized I was seeing him clearly for the first time in years. Not the man I had fallen in love with, not the partner I had built a life with, but the stranger he had become. "Now," I said, "I leave, and you figure out who you are without the wealth I created or the wife you betrayed." The valet brought my car around, a modest Audi I'd chosen for its reliability rather than flash, and I slid into the driver's seat, with hands that finally betrayed my emotion, trembling slightly as I gripped the steering wheel. The Chicago skyline glittered against the night sky, a constellation of lights that had always made me feel at home. Tonight, they seemed to be guiding me somewhere new. I drove aimlessly at first, the events of the evening replaying in my mind like a film I couldn't pause, the look on Grayson's face when he realized what I'd done, the way Tiffany's perfectly glossed mouth had hung open in shock, the murmurs from nearby tables as I'd walked out, head high, leaving them both frozen in the wreckage of their plans. Eventually, I found myself parking outside a small brownstone in Lincoln Park, my best friend Mia's place. I hadn't called ahead, but as I rang the doorbell, I knew she'd be there. She always was. Rachel? Mia opened the door, her dark curls piled on top of her head, wearing yoga pants and an oversized Northwestern University sweatshirt. One look at my face and she pulled me inside. What happened? Are you okay? The question broke something in me. After hours of composure, of strategic calm, I finally let the tears come. They weren't tears of devastation. They were tears of release. He brought her to dinner. I managed between sobs. He actually brought his mistress to dinner to watch him leave me. That son of a... Mia cut herself off, guiding me to her couch. Wait, you knew? About the affair? I nodded, accepting the tissue she offered. For months, maybe longer if I'm honest with myself. And you went to dinner anyway? Rachel, why would you? Because I needed to see his face, I said, my voice steadying. When he realized I'd been 10 steps ahead of him all along, I told her everything, about the accounts, the investments, the apartment, and finally about the look of absolute shock that had transformed Grayson's smug face into a mask of disbelief. Mia stared at me for a long moment before breaking into a slow, appreciative smile. You magnificent bitch, she said, the affection in her voice unmistakable. You absolutely destroyed him. I protected myself, I corrected, though I couldn't help returning her smile. There's a difference. Semantics. She waved a hand dismissively. The point is, he thought he was going to walk away with everything. Your dignity, your security, probably half your wardrobe. And instead, he's the one left with nothing. Not nothing, I said. He has Tiffany. We looked at each other for a beat before dissolving into laughter. The kind of laughter that borders on hysteria, that comes when the alternative is falling apart completely. God, I wish I could have seen it, Mia said when we'd finally composed ourselves. She got up to pour us each a glass of wine, a ritual we'd established during college finals, and maintained through job interviews, breakups, and now, apparently, the end of my marriage. You know what the strangest part is? I said, accepting the glass she offered. I don't even feel sad. I mean, I'm angry, I'm hurt, but mostly I just feel relieved. Because it's finally over, Mia suggested. All the suspicion, all the pretending. I nodded, taking a sip of wine. 15 years? Mia, 15 years of building something I thought was real. It was real, she said firmly. Your part was real. The life you built, the success you created, that was all real. He's the one who was living a lie. We stayed up late that night, talking about everything and nothing, about the past we'd shared as friends, about the future I now faced alone. Mia offered her guest room indefinitely, but we both knew I wouldn't need it. I had resources, options. What I needed was space to breathe, to rediscover the woman who had been slowly disappearing inside my marriage. I slept dreamlessly that night, and in the morning I woke to a barrage of missed calls and texts from Grayson, alternating between pleading and threatening, the desperation clear in every word. I read them all but responded to none. His words no longer held any power over me. Instead, I called my lawyer, Marian Adler, a woman whose reputation for handling high-profile divorces with discretion and ruthless efficiency had earned her the nickname the Executioner among Chicago's elite. I need to see you today, I told her when she picked up on the second ring. I have a cancellation at 11, she replied without missing a beat. I'm assuming this is about Grayson? News traveled fast in our circles. Yes. About time, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. I'll see you at 11. Marian's office occupied the top floor of a sleek building overlooking Millennium Park. Her reception area was understated but impeccably designed, all clean lines and neutral tones with abstract art that probably cost more than most people's cars adorning the walls. Rachel. Marian greeted me with a brief but warm hug when her assistant showed me in. She was in her 60s, with a silver bob that framed a face notable for its intelligence rather than conventional beauty. I've been wondering when you'd call. You knew? I asked, settling into one of the leather chairs facing her desk. I suspected. She sat, down, folding her hands in front of her. I've been doing this for 30 years. I know the signs. What I didn't know was that you'd been preparing so thoroughly. Of course. Marian had friends at every bank in Chicago, connections with every financial institution worth mentioning. I learned from the best, I said, offering a small smile. Indeed you did. She nodded approvingly. Now tell me everything. Start with last night. I recounted the dinner, the revelation, the aftermath. Marian listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad beside her. Well, she said when I'd finished, I have to say, Rachel, you've made my job significantly easier. Most clients come to me after they've been blindsided, scrambling to protect what they can. You've essentially handled the most critical aspect of the divorce before it even began. So what happens now? Now we file. Given what you've told me, Grayson will likely try to contest the transfers, claim you acted fraudulently. She held up a hand before I could protest. It won't work. Everything you did was legal, if unconventional. Joint accounts, joint assets. You had every right to move them. The timing will raise eyebrows, but given the evidence of his affair, no judge worth their salt will side with him. And the apartment? The investments? The apartment's deed is in your name alone, so that's straightforward. As for the investments, we'll need to provide documentation showing your role in managing them. But again, with your background and the paper trail I'm sure you've maintained, we're on solid ground. I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. What about Grayson? What will he do? Marion's expression hardened slightly. He'll try everything. Charm, threats, manipulation, whatever he thinks might work. When those fail, he'll settle. Men like Grayson always do. Their egos can't handle the public spectacle of a protracted legal battle they know they'll lose. She was right. 2 days later, Grayson showed up at Mia's doorstep, his usual polished appearance slightly frayed around the edges. I watched through the peephole as he rang the bell repeatedly, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Against Mia's advice, I opened the door. Rachel. Relief flooded his face. Thank God. We need to talk. No, I said calmly. We don't. Everything that needs to be said was said. At dinner, anything else can go through Marion. His expression darkened. Marion Adler? You've already hired the executioner? Jesus, Rachel, don't you think you're overreacting? Overreacting? I repeated, incredulity creeping into my voice. You brought your mistress to witness you leaving me and I'm overreacting? He had the grace to look slightly ashamed. That was a mistake. I shouldn't have done that. But Rachel, what you've done with our money, that's theft. That's fraud. No, Grayson, it's protection. And it was all perfectly legal. Every transfer, every account change, all with your signature. Remember all those documents you signed without reading? All those times you were too busy to be bothered with financial details? I leaned against the doorframe, studying him. How does it feel to be on the other side of carelessness? The divorce proceedings moved with surprising speed. As Marion had predicted, Grayson attempted to contest the financial transfers, claiming I had acted in bad faith. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with a reputation for fairness, dismissed his claims after reviewing our financial history and the evidence of his affair. Mrs. Langford acted to protect assets she herself had largely managed and grown, Judge Harmon stated during our final hearing. Given Mr. Langford's demonstrable pattern of deceit and his admission of infidelity, the court finds no evidence of fraudulent intent on Mrs. Langford's part. Grayson sat beside his lawyer, his face a rigid mask of controlled fury. Tiffany was nowhere to be seen. She'd apparently lost interest once it became clear that the wealthy man she thought she was getting was, in fact, largely dependent on the wife he was leaving. I won't pretend I didn't feel a flash of satisfaction seeing him there, diminished, stripped of both his arrogance and his financial leverage. But mostly I felt free, like a prisoner walking out of confinement into sunlight so bright it almost hurts. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in early spring, exactly 3 months after that fateful dinner at Blue Heron Bistro. I walked out of the courthouse alone, declining Marion's offer to join her for a celebratory lunch. Another time, I promised. Today, I just need to breathe. I spent that afternoon walking along the lakeshore, watching the water shift and change under the afternoon light. Chicago had always been my city, the place where I'd built my adult life, my career, my marriage. Now it would be the place where I built something new, something entirely my own. The question was, what? For so long, my identity had been tied to Grayson's, his wife, his financial manager, his partner. Even as I'd protected myself financially, I'd never really considered who I might be without him, what I might want for myself alone. I found myself wandering into a small cafe near the water, ordering a cappuccino and sitting by the window, watching people pass by. Couples holding hands, families with strollers, business people hurrying to meetings, all moving through lives that had nothing to do with mine. The anonymity was both terrifying and exhilarating. Is this seat taken? I looked up to find a woman about my age gesturing to the chair across from me. The cafe had filled while I was lost in thought, every table now occupied except for the empty seat at mine. "Please," I said, moving my bag to make room. "Thank you." She sat down with a grateful smile, setting her laptop on the table. "I promise I won't bother you. Just need to finish some work before my next appointment." Nodded and returned to my coffee, but found myself watching her surreptitiously. There was something compelling about her focused energy, the way she attacked her keyboard with purpose. After a few minutes, she looked up and caught me watching. Instead of being annoyed, she smiled. "Sorry, am I typing too loudly? My colleagues say I sound like a machine gun when I get going." "Not at all," I assured her. "I was just—" What was I doing? "Admiring your focus." She laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "Necessity more than virtue. I've got a client meeting in an hour and I'm desperately trying to finish this proposal." "What kind of work do you do?" "Financial consulting for nonprofit organizations," she replied. "Not the most glamorous field, but it's meaningful. I'm Diane, by the way." "Rachel?" I offered. "And actually, that sounds fascinating." Before I knew it, we were deep in conversation about investment strategies for organizations with limited resources, ethical portfolio management, and the challenges of balancing financial growth with social impact. It was the most intellectually stimulating discussion I'd had in years, untainted by competition or ego. "You really know your stuff," Diane said, glancing at her watch and looking genuinely disappointed. "But I've got to run to that meeting. Listen, this is probably unorthodox, but my firm is actually looking for someone with your expertise. Would you be interested in getting coffee again? Maybe in a more professional capacity?" The question caught me off guard. I haven't worked formally in finance for years," I admitted. "I've been managing personal investments." "Even better," she replied, pulling out a business card and sliding it across the table. "Personal investment management requires a different kind of discipline. And frankly, we need someone who understands how to work with high-net-worth clients who want their money to do more than just grow." I looked down at the card. Diane Reynolds, Executive Director, Impact Investing Division, Chamberlain and Associates. "I'll think about it," I promised. "Do that." She gathered her things, then paused. "Whatever you decide, I enjoyed our conversation, Rachel. Sometimes the most unexpected connections are the most valuable." As I watched her leave, I felt something stir within me, a sense of possibility I hadn't experienced in longer than I could remember. For years, I'd used my financial skills in service to Grayson's ambitions, to our shared wealth. What would it mean to use them for something larger, something with purpose beyond accumulation? I slipped Diane's card into my wallet and left the cafe, my steps lighter than they had been in months. The lake stretched before me, vast and changeable, much like the future I was now free to create. That night, I returned to the apartment on Lakeshore Drive for the first time since the dinner. Grayson had moved out weeks ago, taking only his personal belongings. The space felt both familiar and strange, like visiting a place you once lived but no longer belong. I moved through the rooms slowly, touching furniture, opening drawers, reacquainting myself with a space that was now entirely mine. In the home office, I found myself drawn to the filing cabinets where I'd kept meticulous records of our financial life together. 15 years of growth, of careful planning, of quiet achievement. Sitting at the desk, I opened my laptop and began to research Chamberlain and Associates. Their website spoke of aligning capital with conscience, of helping wealthy individuals and organizations invest in ways that generated both financial returns and positive social impact. Before I could overthink it, I pulled out my phone and Diane's card and composed a text. "This is Rachel from the cafe. I've given it some thought. I'd like to have that coffee." Her response came almost immediately. "Excellent. Tomorrow 9 a.m., same place?" "I'll be there," I replied, feeling a flutter of nervousness and excitement. It wasn't a job interview, not officially, but it was a step toward something new, something mine. Coffee with Diane wasn't just coffee. It was a lifeline thrown across the chasm of my uncertainty. The cafe felt different in the morning light, bustling with commuters grabbing espressos before heading to offices throughout downtown Chicago. I arrived early, choosing a table by the window, dressed in a tailored charcoal pantsuit I'd rarely worn during my years as Grayson's wife. Diane arrived precisely at 9, her energy as focused as it had been the day before. She wore a simple navy dress with a structured blazer, her curly hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. No pretension, no flash, just competence embodied. "You look ready for battle," she commented with a smile, sliding into the seat across from me. Is that what this is? I asked, returning her smile. Not battle, opportunity. She set her portfolio on the table. Let me tell you about what we do at Chamberlain and why I think you might be perfect for us. For the next hour, Diane outlined the firm's approach to impact investing, using capital to generate social and environmental change alongside financial returns. They worked with foundations, family offices, and high net worth individuals who wanted their wealth to reflect their values. The financial world is changing, she explained, passion evident in her voice. People, especially younger generations inheriting wealth, don't want to separate their money from their morals anymore. They're looking for advisors who understand both exceptional returns and exceptional impact. And where do I fit in? I asked, genuinely curious. We need someone who can speak the language of traditional wealth management, but is open to a more holistic approach. Someone who understands the concerns and priorities of clients coming from conventional investment backgrounds. From our conversation yesterday, I think that could be you. The prospect was both exhilarating and terrifying. For years, I'd operated in the shadows of my own expertise, letting Grayson take credit for financial strategies I had designed. The idea of stepping into the light, of claiming my knowledge openly, made my heart race. I haven't worked professionally in years, I reminded her. My experience has been private. Diane nodded. I understand. But sometimes that kind of experience, intimate, hands-on management of substantial assets, is more valuable than a decade at a big firm following someone else's playbook. She pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. This is information about an associate position we're looking to fill. The compensation is competitive, though perhaps not what you're accustomed to. I almost laughed. She had no idea what I was accustomed to. The private jets Grayson insisted on for vacations, the restaurant bills that could feed a family for a month, the endless cycle of acquisition that had come to feel more like obligation than pleasure. Compensation isn't my primary concern, I said honestly. Diane studied me for a moment. What is your primary concern, Rachel? The question caught me off guard, with its directness. Purpose, I answered after a moment's reflection. Using what I know to do something meaningful. Her expression softened. That we can definitely offer. 2 days later, I found myself in the offices of Chamberlain and Associates, meeting with the founding partners and discussing my potential role with the firm. The office itself reflected the company's philosophy, thoughtfully designed with sustainable materials, energy-efficient systems, and artwork from local artists whose sales supported community programs. Martin Chamberlain, the firm's founder and CEO, was a man in his early 60s with kind eyes and a reputation for integrity that had survived 3 decades in an industry not known for it. Your track record is impressive, he said, reviewing the portfolio performance documents I'd provided. These returns consistently outperform the market, often with lower volatility. What's your secret? Patience, I replied. And research. I never invest in anything I don't thoroughly understand. Not just the numbers, but the underlying business, the leadership, the long-term strategy. He nodded approvingly. And how do you feel about applying those principles to investments that also prioritize social and environmental returns? I think it's the future, I said, surprised by my own certainty. Financial returns matter, but they can't be the only metric of success anymore. Not in a world facing the challenges ours is. The interview continued for almost 2 hours, covering everything from technical analysis to client communication styles. By the end, I felt drained but invigorated in a way I hadn't experienced in years. We'd like to offer you the position, Martin said finally, with a 6-month probationary period, standard for all new associates regardless of experience level. I accepted on the spot. Walking out of the Chamberlain offices that afternoon, I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt since before I met Grayson, pride that belonged entirely to me, untethered from anyone else's achievements or approval. My phone buzzed as I reached the street, a text from Grayson. We need to talk about the Westbrook investment, urgently. I stared at the message, realizing I hadn't thought about the Westbrook investment, a significant position in a real estate development company, in weeks. It had been one of our holdings, though like most of our portfolio, I had transferred it solely to my name months ago. For a moment, I considered ignoring the message, but something, curiosity perhaps, made me respond, "What about it?" His reply was immediate. "It's tanking. Rumors of accounting irregularities. We need to get out now." I checked the markets on my phone. Sure enough, Westbrook's stock had dropped nearly 30% since the morning. Grayson was right. We needed to exit the position before things got worse. except there was no we anymore. I typed back, "Thank you for the information. I'll handle it." By the time I reached my apartment, I had liquidated the Westbrook position, absorbing a significant loss but avoiding what would likely be a much steeper decline. As I completed the transaction, another text from Grayson arrived. "Did you get out in time?" "Yes," I replied. "Thanks for the heads up." There was a long pause before his next message. "You're welcome. Just because we're not together doesn't mean I want to see you lose everything." I stared at the screen, trying to decipher his tone, his motivation. Was this genuine concern, or an attempt to reestablish some connection to prove his continued value in my life? "I appreciate that," I wrote finally, "but I've got this." And I did. For the first time in 15 years, I truly had my own life in my own hands. The following weeks passed in a blur of new routines and unfamiliar challenges. My days at Chamberlain were intellectually demanding in the best possible way, learning new investment frameworks that incorporated social impact alongside financial returns, meeting clients whose passion for change matched their wealth, collaborating with colleagues who valued substance over status. Evenings, I explored a Chicago I had never really known despite living in it for years. I joined a book club that met at an independent bookstore in Wicker Park. I took cooking classes at a community center in Pilsen. I volunteered at a financial literacy program for women transitioning out of homelessness. Slowly, I began to rediscover pieces of myself that had been subsumed in my marriage: my love of photography, my interest in urban gardening, my preference for quiet gatherings over flashy events. I made new friends who knew nothing of my past wealth or my public humiliation, who liked me for who I was rather than what I represented. One evening as I was leaving the office, Martin Chamberlain stopped me in the hallway. "Rachel, I wanted to let you know that the Reynolds Foundation was extremely impressed with your presentation today. They've decided to move their entire portfolio to our management." I blinked in surprise. The Reynolds Foundation was a significant potential client I'd met with that morning, a family foundation with nearly $100 million in assets looking to align their investments with their mission of environmental conservation. "That's wonderful," I said, genuine pleasure warming my voice. "They have such important work to support." Martin nodded. "They specifically mentioned your approach, how you took the time to understand their priorities beyond just the financial targets. That's exactly what sets Chamberlain apart." He paused, studying me. "You're doing exceptional work, Rachel. The probationary period is just a formality at this point." As I thanked him and continued toward the elevator, I felt a lightness in my step that had nothing to do with securing a major client or earning professional praise. It was the satisfaction of being seen, truly seen, for my abilities, rather than as an extension of someone else's success. That night, I returned to my apartment to find a package waiting outside my door. No return address, just my name in familiar handwriting. Grayson's. Inside was a small velvet box containing the pearl earrings I had worn to our last dinner together. My grandmother's earrings that I must have left behind in my hasty departure from our shared life. Beneath the box was a note. "These belong with you. Always have." I stood in my hallway, the pearls cool in my palm, unexpected emotion tightening my throat. Not for Grayson, or for what we had lost, but for the complicated nature of endings. How even the most painful separations can contain moments of grace. 6 months after starting at Chamberlain and Associates, I found myself at a EHI fundraising gala for the Chicago Climate Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to making the city a leader in urban sustainability. The event was being held at the Field Museum, the massive dinosaur skeleton in the main hall serving as a dramatic backdrop for tables draped in white linen and adorned with centerpieces of locally grown wildflowers. As one of Chamberlain's representatives, I was there to support clients who had invested in the initiative and to network with potential new clients interested in environmental impact investing. I wore a simple emerald gown, elegant but understated, and my grandmother's pearl earrings, a subtle reminder of how far I'd come. I was in conversation with the director of the initiative when I felt a tap on my shoulder. Turning, I found myself face to face with Tiffany Reed. The shock must have shown on my face because she immediately held up her hands in a placating gesture. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she said quickly. "I just saw you across the room and thought I should say something." She looked different, still beautiful, but in a less calculated way. Her blonde hair was shorter, her makeup more subtle. She wore a black cocktail dress. That was stylish, but not the attention-grabbing outfit I remembered from our last encounter. "I'm not sure we have anything to say to each other," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. The director, sensing tension, excused herself with a polite murmur about making rounds. Tiffany glanced around nervously. Could we maybe talk somewhere a bit more private? Just for a minute. Against my better judgment. I nodded and led her to a quieter corner near one of the museum's side exhibits. What do you want, Tiffany? She took a deep breath. To apologize. What happened at that dinner? It was cruel. I knew it was wrong even as it was happening, but I was so caught up in believing Grayson's lies, I finished for her. She looked down. Yes, that and my own delusions about who I was when I was with him. She met my eyes again. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I participated in, and I'm truly sorry. I studied her, searching for insincerity but finding none. What happened with you and Grayson? I asked, curiosity getting the better of me. A sad smile touched her lips. Reality happened. Once he realized he wasn't the wealthy, powerful man he'd presented himself as, things changed. Or maybe they didn't change so much as reveal their true nature. She shrugged. We lasted about 2 months after your divorce was finalized. I wasn't surprised. Without his financial status and the thrill of the forbidden, what did Grayson really have to offer? His charm wore thin when you had to rely on it day after day. I'm sorry things didn't work out the way you hoped, I said, and was surprised to realize I meant it. Tiffany laughed, a short, self-deprecating sound. Don't be. It was the wake-up call I needed. I've been doing a lot of thinking about the kind of person I want to be, the kind of life I want to lead. She gestured around at the gala. That's actually why I'm here tonight. I'm volunteering with the Initiative's Community Outreach Program. Now I was genuinely surprised. You're volunteering? She nodded, a flash of something like pride crossing her face. 3 days a week. We work with schools in underserved neighborhoods to create urban gardens and teach kids about sustainable food systems. She smiled ruefully. Turns out I have a knack for getting my hands dirty. The image of perfectly manicured Tiffany planting vegetables with school children was so unexpected that I couldn't help but smile. That's commendable. It's necessary, she corrected. For me, at least. A way to contribute something real instead of just taking up space and looking decorative. She glanced at her watch. I should get back to my station. Thank you for listening, Rachel. You didn't have to. As she turned to go, I surprised myself by calling after her. Tiffany, I hope you find what you're looking for. She paused, looking back at me with genuine warmth. I think I'm starting to. I hope you already have. The encounter left me oddly unsettled. I had spent months mentally casting Tiffany as a one-dimensional villain in the story of my marriage's end. The younger woman, the temptress, the embodiment of Grayson's betrayal. Seeing her as a complex human being capable of growth and regret forced me to reconsider my own narrative. I was still processing this when I nearly collided with a tall figure at the champagne table. I'm so sorry, I began, then stopped short when I recognized him. David Chen, a prominent architect known for his innovative, sustainable design projects. We had been introduced briefly at a Chamberlain client event months earlier. Rachel Langford, he said, recognition lighting his eyes. From Chamberlain and Associates, right? That's right, I confirmed. Pleased he remembered. David Chen, your work on the Riverside Renewal Project is remarkable. He smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. Thank you. It's rare to meet someone at these events who actually knows the projects beyond their fundraising potential. Well, your approach to integrating green spaces with affordable housing is directly aligned with several of our impact investment portfolios, I explained. I've studied your designs quite thoroughly. Should I be flattered or concerned? He asked, his tone teasing. Flattered, definitely, I assured him. Your work represents exactly the kind of innovation our clients want to support. Practical solutions to real problems, not just greenwashing for publicity. David laughed, a warm, genuine sound. You certainly don't mince words. I find that refreshing. We fell into easy conversation about the challenges of truly sustainable urban development, the balance between environmental goals and community needs. David was passionate but thoughtful, confident without arrogance, a combination I found increasingly rare in successful men. Would you like to see some of our projects firsthand? He asked as the evening was winding down. The Riverside site is in its final stages. I could give you a tour if you're interested. Strictly professional, of course. The clarification made me smile. I'd like that. For work purposes, naturally. Naturally, he agreed, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I'll email you with some potential dates. I nodded, exchanging business cards in a gesture that felt both formal and charged with unspoken possibility. As I made my way home that evening, I found myself thinking about connections, how some dissolve while others form, how people enter our lives for reasons we can't initially comprehend. Tiffany's unexpected evolution, David's surprising invitation, my own transformation from the shadow of Grayson's wife to a woman with her own distinct path. The tour of the Riverside project happened the following week, a crisp fall day with leaves turning golden along the Chicago River. David met me at the site, dressed casually in jeans and a navy sweater, looking more relaxed than he had at the gala, but no less compelling. "Welcome to what will hopefully be Chicago's most innovative mixed-use development," he said, handing me a hard hat with a smile. "Safety first, even for distinguished financial advisors." The project was even more impressive up close, a former industrial area being transformed into a community-centered space with affordable housing, rooftop gardens, solar installations, and public areas designed to foster connection rather than consumption. The whole site will be net zero energy within 5 years, David explained as we walked through a nearly completed apartment building. And 30% of the units are permanently designated as affordable housing, with priority given to families displaced by gentrification in other neighborhoods. "It's remarkable," I said honestly. "Most developers would have maximized luxury units for profit." David nodded. "That was the original plan, actually. When I first got involved, the investors were pushing for high-end condos with just the minimum required affordable units. What changed their minds? Numbers, mostly," he said with a pragmatic shrug. "We showed them data on long-term community stability, reduced maintenance costs with resident investment, positive press value, and tax incentives. Plus, the pandemic shifted everyone's thinking about what makes cities resilient. Turns out, economic diversity is as important as biodiversity in creating sustainable systems." I looked at him with new appreciation. "You speak both languages, social good and financial. Return. Don't you have to?" he asked. "In your work, I mean. Finding the intersection of profit and purpose seems to be exactly what Chamberlain does." "It is," I agreed, though many people see it as an either-or proposition. Either you make money or you do good. "Those people lack imagination," David said simply, leading me up to the building's rooftop garden. "The most interesting solutions happen in the both and space." The view from the roof was breathtaking, the Chicago skyline stretching before us, the river winding below, the late afternoon sun casting everything in golden light. Raised beds were already installed, waiting for spring planting. "This is my favorite spot in the whole development," David admitted. "When everything is complete, residents will grow food up here, have community dinners, teach their kids about where food comes from. It's not just sustainable in the environmental sense, it's about sustaining community." His passion was evident in every word, every gesture as he described his vision. It had been a long time since I'd been in the presence of someone so genuinely committed to creating something meaningful. "You really believe in this, don't you?" I said. He turned to look at me, his expression serious. "I have to. Architecture isn't just about buildings. It's about the lives that happen inside them, around them. If I'm going to leave a mark on this city, I want it to be one that makes life better, not just prettier or more profitable." The conviction in his voice resonated with something in me, the same impulse that had drawn me to Chamberlain, the desire to align my work with something larger than myself. "Thank you for showing me this," I said softly. "It's given me a much deeper understanding of the project than any prospectus could." "Thank you for seeing it," he replied, his eyes holding mine. "Really seeing it, not just looking at the specs or the potential returns." We stood there on the rooftop as the sun began to set, the city lighting up around us. Two people connected by a shared appreciation for creating meaningful change in the world. It wasn't romance, not yet, but it was possibility, potential, the first threads of a connection based on mutual respect and aligned values. And for the first time since my marriage had imploded in public humiliation, I found myself open to that possibility, curious about where it might lead. A year to the day after that fateful dinner at Blue Heron Bistro, I found myself sitting at the same restaurant, at a different table, with a different perspective. The lake still shimmered beyond the windows. The chandeliers still cast their warm glow over white tablecloths. But everything else had changed. "Are you sure you want to be here?" David asked, his dark eyes searching my face with the perceptiveness I'd come to value over the past 6 months of knowing him. I nodded, smoothing my napkin across my lap. Actually, yes. It feels right somehow. Completing the circle. Our relationship had evolved gradually from professional respect to friendship to something deeper, a connection built on shared values and genuine understanding. Unlike my whirlwind romance with Grayson, which had burned bright and fast, what David and I shared had developed slowly, thoughtfully, each step taken with full awareness. You know, I said, taking a sip of the Pinot Noir I'd barely touched a year ago. The last time I was here, I thought my life was ending. Now I realize it was just beginning. David reached across the table to take my hand, his touch familiar and comforting. Sometimes we need to be broken open to find out what's really inside. I smiled, recognizing the quote. Been reading those philosophy books I lent you? Every night, he admitted with a sheepish grin, though I'm not sure I'm any wiser. Oh, I don't know about that, I teased. The David Chen who nervously asked me to coffee after our third professional meeting seemed much less sure of himself than the man sitting across from me now. He laughed, the sound warming me more than the wine. That man was terrified you'd see right through his professional pretense to the fact that he found you fascinating. And now? Now I hope you see right through me, he said simply. It's one of the things I love most about being with you. I don't have to pretend to be anything other than exactly who I am. The word love hung in the air between us, not for the first time, but somehow weightier in this place where love had once been so brutally betrayed. Our dinner was interrupted by the arrival of the restaurant's owner, Marco, who recognized me immediately. Mrs. Langford, he said, approaching our table with a mixture of caution and warmth. It's good to see you again. I hope everything is to your satisfaction. Everything is perfect, Marco, I assured him, touched that he remembered me. And it's just Ms. Langford now. He nodded, glancing approvingly at David. I'm glad to hear it. Your meal tonight is on the house, a small gesture to make up for last time. I started to protest, but Marco held up his hand. Please, I insist. What happened here that night? It should never have happened in my restaurant. Some people, they have no class, no respect. He shook his head disapprovingly. But you, Signora, you showed true dignity. We all remembered. After he left, David raised an eyebrow. Sounds like you made quite an impression. Not intentionally, I said, feeling a flush rise to my cheeks. It wasn't my finest hour. From what Marco just said, I'd argue it was exactly that, David countered. Standing in your truth with dignity, even when someone tries to humiliate you, that sounds like strength to me. I considered his words, turning them over in my mind like smooth stones. Maybe. At the time, it felt like survival more than strength. Aren't they often the same thing? Before I could answer, a familiar voice interrupted us. Rachel! I looked up to find Grayson standing beside our table, his expression a mix of surprise and discomfort. He looked older somehow, the silver in his hair more prominent, lines around his eyes I hadn't noticed before. Grayson, I acknowledged, my voice steady. What a coincidence. Not entirely, he admitted. I come here most Thursdays now. The staff mentioned you had a reservation tonight. He glanced at David, then back to me. I almost canceled, but I thought maybe it was time we talked. Properly. I felt David tense slightly beside me, protective but restrained. This is David Chen, I said, making the introduction. David, this is Grayson Langford, my ex-husband. The men exchanged brief nods, sizing each other up with the wariness of territorial animals. Would you like to join us? David offered, surprising both Grayson and me with his generosity. Grayson hesitated, then shook his head. Thank you, but no. I don't want to intrude on your evening. He turned to me. I just wanted to say something, if that's all right. I nodded, curious despite myself. I've been doing a lot of thinking this past year, he said, his voice quieter than I remembered. About who I was in our marriage, the choices I made, the person I became. He paused, seeming to gather himself. I was wrong, Rachel. Not just about the money or Tiffany. I was wrong about what mattered, about who mattered. The admission hung in the air between us, unexpected and raw. I appreciate you saying that, I said finally, surprised to find I meant it. Are you happy? He asked, a vulnerability in his question I'd rarely heard during our years together. I looked at David, then back at Grayson. Yes, I am. Something like relief crossed his face. Good. You deserve that. He stepped back from our table. Thank you for hearing me out. Enjoy your dinner. As he walked away, I felt a strange sense of closure. Not the vindication I might once have imagined, but something quieter and more complete. The anger and hurt that had driven my financial maneuvering, that had fueled my determination to rebuild, had gradually transformed into something else. Compassion, not just for myself, but even surprisingly, for Grayson. "Are you okay?" David asked when Grayson was out of earshot. I reached for his hand across the table. "More than okay. I think I just finally let go of something I didn't even realize I was still carrying." Later that night, as David and I walked along the lake shore, the city lights reflecting on the water, I found myself recounting the story of my marriage's end. Not the sanitized version I'd shared with colleagues or the practical details I'd outlined for David before, but the emotional truth of it, the humiliation, the calculation, the moment of power reclaimed. "Do you ever regret it?" David asked. "Taking control of the finances the way you did?" I considered the question seriously. "I regret that it came to that," I said finally. "I regret that our marriage became a battleground where I had to protect myself, but do I regret ensuring my own security, my own future? No, that was self-preservation, not vindictiveness." David nodded. "The difference matters." "It does," I agreed. For a long time, I worried that what I'd done made me no better than Grayson, manipulating the situation for my own benefit. But I've come to realize there's a world of difference between defending your dignity and destroying someone else's. We stopped walking, facing the vast darkness of the lake, the city bright behind us. "I have something I want to ask you," David said, his voice taking on a note of seriousness that made me turn to look at him. "That sounds ominous," I teased, though my heart had begun to beat faster. He smiled, taking both my hands in his. "Not ominous, hopeful." He took a deep breath. "The Riverside project is complete. The firm wants me to lead a similar development in Seattle. Sustainable, community-focused, innovative. It's a 2-year commitment, at least." "Seattle," I repeated, processing the implications. "That's a big opportunity." "It is," he agreed. "But Chicago has become home in ways I never expected." "Because of the work?" "Yes, but mostly because of you." His eyes held mine, steadfast and certain. "I told them I needed to talk to you first, that my decision depends on yours." "Mine?" "Rachel, I'm not asking you to uproot your life for me. Your career at Chamberlain, the community you've built here. I understand how important those are. But I am asking if you'd consider the possibility of us finding a way forward together, whether that's here or in Seattle or somewhere else entirely." I looked at this man who had entered my life when I least expected it, who had shown me what partnership could truly mean: mutual respect, shared purpose, genuine support. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" He laughed softly. "I'm asking if you'll marry me. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday when we're both ready. I'm asking if you'll build a life with me, wherever that life takes us." The question hung between us, weighted with possibility. A year ago, the very idea of remarriage would have seemed absurd, a lesson I'd already failed and had no interest in repeating. But standing there with David, I realized how much had changed. How much I had changed. "Yes," I said, the single syllable containing multitudes of meaning. "Yes to building a life together. Yes to figuring out Seattle or Chicago or wherever else we might go. Yes to someday when we're ready." David's face broke into a smile of such genuine joy that it took my breath away. He pulled me into an embrace, holding me close as the wind off the lake whipped around us. And I felt a certainty I had never known with Grayson. Not the false security of material wealth, but the true stability of being fully seen and truly valued. 2 years later, Seattle welcomed us with endless rain and unexpected sunshine, with mountains visible on clear days and water surrounding the city like nature's embrace. Our apartment overlooked Elliott Bay, modest by the standards of what I'd once owned in Chicago, but perfect for the life we were building together. The transition hadn't been without challenges. Leaving Chamberlain had been bittersweet, though Martin had surprised me with an offer I hadn't anticipated. "We've been considering a West Coast expansion for years," he'd said during my exit interview. "Your move could be the perfect catalyst. Would you consider heading up a Seattle office? Small at first, just you and perhaps one support staff, but with room to grow." The opportunity to maintain my connection with Chamberlain while supporting David's career and building something new had been too perfect to refuse. Within 6 months of our relocation, Chamberlain and Associates, Pacific Northwest, was operational, occupying a small but beautiful office space in a renovated historic building downtown. David's Riverside-inspired project was transforming a formerly industrial neighborhood into a model of sustainable urban living, incorporating lessons learned in Chicago while adapting to Seattle's unique environment and community needs. His days were long but fulfilling, his passion for creating meaningful spaces only growing with each challenge overcome. We had married simply, in a ceremony by the lake in Chicago before our move, just close friends and family, Mia as my maid of honor, David's brother as his best man. No extravagance, no performance, just an honest celebration of the partnership we had built and the future we planned to create together. Grayson had sent a card, his handwriting familiar, but the sentiment new. Wishing you the happiness you always deserved. May your new beginning bring you everything I failed to appreciate. I'd kept the card, not out of lingering attachment, but as a reminder of how far I had come, from a woman defined by her husband's perception to a woman standing confidently in her own identity. This particular evening found me preparing for an event I'd been both anticipating and dreading, a financial empowerment workshop for women transitioning out of abusive relationships. I'd been invited to speak about financial independence and protection, about the practical steps women could take to secure their futures when leaving dangerous situations. "Are you nervous?" David asked, helping me with the clasp of the simple necklace he'd given me on our first anniversary, a silver pendant in the shape of a key, symbolizing new doors opened. "A little," I admitted, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "It's one thing to talk about investment strategies with wealthy clients. It's another to share my personal story with women who are in crisis. Your story might be exactly what they need to hear," he said gently. "Not because your situation was identical to theirs, but because you understand what it means to reclaim your power from someone who betrayed you." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "I just want to be helpful, not self-indulgent." "Have you ever been self-indulgent a day in your life?" David teased, kissing the top of my head. "You'll find the right words. You always do." The community center was located in a renovated church building, its stained glass windows casting colorful patterns across the wooden floor of the meeting room. About 30 women had gathered, some with children who were being looked after in an adjacent room. Their faces reflected various emotions: wariness, exhaustion, determination, hope. The program saw. Director, Elena, introduced me with a warmth that helped ease my nerves. "Rachel isn't just a financial advisor," she told the group. "She's someone who has lived through financial manipulation and found her way to security and independence. She's here to share both her professional expertise and her personal experience." As I took my place at the front of the room, I looked out at the women, watching me. Women who had faced challenges far more devastating than my public humiliation. Women who had risked their lives to leave situations I could barely imagine. "Thank you for having me," I began. "I want to start by acknowledging that my story is not the same as yours. The betrayal I experienced in my first marriage was painful, but it wasn't physically dangerous. The control my ex-husband attempted to exert was subtle, not violent. I recognize that privilege." I saw nods of appreciation for the acknowledgement. "But what I do understand, what I believe many of us share, is the experience of having your sense of self undermined by someone who claimed to love you, of having your contributions diminished, your capabilities questioned, your independence restricted." More nods, more engaged eyes. "My first husband made me believe that our financial success was his achievement alone, that my role was merely supportive, not essential. When he decided to leave me for a younger woman, he assumed the wealth we had built together would remain largely under his control." I paused, remembering the shock on Grayson's face at that dinner 2.5 years ago. What he didn't realize was that I had been quietly protecting myself, legally transferring our joint assets into my name as I began to suspect his betrayal. When he announced he was leaving me, in public, at a restaurant, with his mistress present, he discovered that the financial power he thought he wielded didn't actually exist. A few murmurs of approval rippled through the group. "I'm not telling you this story to suggest that revenge is the answer," I continued. "I'm telling you because I want you to understand that financial knowledge is power. Understanding your rights, your resources, and your options is crucial to building a life of true independence." For the next hour, I shared practical advice: how to establish credit in your own name, how to document assets, how to work with legal aid services, how to build financial literacy when you've been deliberately kept in the dark. The women asked questions, took notes, shared their own insights and challenges. As the session wound down, a woman in the back raised her hand. "Did you ever feel guilty for taking control like that?" The question resonated with something I'd struggled with myself. Yes, I admitted. I questioned whether I was being vindictive rather than protective. But over time, I came to understand that there's a fundamental difference between revenge and self-preservation. I didn't take action to hurt my ex-husband. I took action to ensure my own security in a situation where I could no longer trust him to consider my well-being. The woman nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. Another hand went up. Are you happy now, after everything? I smiled, thinking of the life I'd built. My thriving Seattle office, my marriage to David, the community work that increasingly fulfilled me. Yes, I said honestly, but not because of the money I protected. The financial security gave me options, but the happiness came from discovering who I am outside of anyone else's definition or validation. After the Yakza workshop concluded, several women approached me individually, sharing pieces of their stories, asking specific questions about their situations. I connected with each one, exchanging contact information, promising resources and follow-up. The last to approach was a young woman who had been quiet throughout the session, her eyes attentive but her voice unheard. I just wanted to say thank you, she said softly. Not just for the financial advice, but for showing us that there can be a good life waiting on the other side. Sometimes that's hard to imagine when you're still in the middle of the storm. Her words touched something deep within me. The storm does pass, I assured her, and you discover strengths in yourself you never knew existed. Later that night, as David and I walked along the waterfront near our apartment, I recounted the workshop, the women's questions, the young woman's final comment. "You're making a real difference," David said, his arm warm around my shoulders in the cool evening air. "Those women will remember what you shared for years to come." "I hope so," I said. It feels like giving meaning to what happened, taking something painful and transforming it into something useful for others. We stopped walking, looking out at the fairy lights moving across the darkened water. "You know what I realized today?" I said, turning to face him. "The most valuable thing I took from my marriage to Grayson wasn't the money." David raised an eyebrow. No. It was the lesson that true wealth isn't about bank accounts or investments or property deeds. Those things can disappear in an instant. Market crashes, natural disasters, legal battles. I took his hand, feeling its familiar warmth. True wealth is knowing your own worth, independent of anyone else's assessment. It's having the courage to start over when necessary, and the wisdom to recognize genuine connection when it appears. David's eyes softened. That's a lesson worth more than any portfolio. Exactly, I agreed. And it's one I try to share with every client now, whether they're managing millions or just starting to save. Financial security matters, but it's meaningless if you don't also invest in your own growth, your own integrity, your own capacity for joy. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of salt water and the distant sound of a fairy horn. David pulled me closer, and I leaned into his embrace, grateful for the journey that had led me from that humiliating night at Blue Heron Bistro to this peaceful moment by a different body of water, with a different man, as a different woman. The money I'd secured had given me freedom, yes, but the true transformation, from Grayson's shadow to my own light, had come from within. That was the wealth no one could ever take from me, the fortune I would continue to invest in others for the rest of my life. As we turned to walk home, I thought about the title of my workshop, Building Financial Independence. Perhaps the next one should be called something different, something that captured the deeper truth I had discovered through my own experience. The wealth within. I said the words aloud, testing how they felt. "What's that?" David asked. "Just thinking about titles for future workshops," I explained. "Something that reflects what really matters." He smiled, understanding as he always did. "Perfect. It's exactly what you've been teaching all along." And it was. Through all the twists and turns, the public humiliation and private triumph, the endings and beginnings, I had discovered the most valuable asset of all. Myself, whole and complete, capable of creating a life rich with meaning, purpose, and love. That was a wealth statement no bank could ever generate, a portfolio no market could ever crash, a legacy that would continue to appreciate long after any financial investment had run its course. That was the story I would keep telling, to the women in workshops, to the clients in my office, to anyone who needed to hear that their worth wasn't determined by someone else's calculation. That was the truth I had found on the other side of betrayal. When you know your own value, no one can ever truly bankrupt your life.